I think for me, the water of day to day life today is modern political history and the kind of current individual level micro environment in which we live, as well as the macro level global framework in which we all, over 7 billion of us, live our lives. And this macro political history, as well as more micro level, but just in the kind of broad sweep of politics and international relations. This often is lost on people who have day to day lives. They have things to do that they don't have the opportunity or the desire or the interest to be able to take a step back and kind of realize or to think about or to address where we've come from, how the world in which we live in now, as kind of typified by this world map, got to be the way that it got to be. At the ANU and all the classes that you've talked about, I'm sure you've kind of filled in your own mental map and understood the water in which we all, as goldfish, live in certain parts of this world. But I wanted to start in this week one of this class on environment, human security, and conflict on trying to understand how things that you just might take for granted, like this global map, got to be that the way that it is. This is a political document, right? We might use these kind of maps for deciding where we're going to go on holiday now that we can actually travel outside of Australian borders, where different challenging areas, parts of the world are, right? The Ukraine now has no-fly zones because by Western airlines, because of insurance companies won't provide insurance for airlines flying over certain countries. A major passenger jet was shot down a couple of years ago because it flew over an area in which there was ongoing instability. And so I think we could spend our entire lives trying to focus on different parts of this map. How did Sudan get broken up between South Sudan and the other Sudan? How did European countries' borders came to be the way that they were? The border between Pakistan and India. That's a fascinating story about people parachuting in from the colonial power and taking a altogether individual level perspective that had an impact on millions of people. And so I think the water is these macro political forces and environmental forces that we're going to be touching on in this class. And I think it's useful to kind of contrast that to the natural world and how this is a cleaned but real satellite picture of the world with all the clouds removed, but you can see the lack of most natural borders besides some geographic borders between different regions, but less so even within continents, that how humans have put a shape on an imprint on this world. From, you see the desert part of northern Africa, how that Sahel region has changed, and how the Sahara Desert is growing at a couple of football pitches per day. How you can see in this picture the northern hemisphere is in winter and you see the snow across the Arctic regions, how that snow cap has become dramatically less over the last couple of decades. That you have this kind of technological capability to be able to launch satellites, take pictures, to use computers to be able to remove the clouds, but still face these age-old challenges of from Cain and Abel onwards, to be able to struggle over control of the land and the resources within this simple world. Oh. So maps are a way, I think, to provide meaning or context or to try to describe information to people. So this political map, right, shows nation states and the few territories that are still owned by or controlled by other states quite far away. I mean, New Caledonia would be an example of that in our part of the world that just had a referendum deciding not to become independent from France. But you have political map showing the political reality of the world. This one would be focused on trying to understand the differences between different zones, arid, tropical, temperate zones of the world. However, whatever kind of natural question you might want to have. A lot of the issues we're going to be talking about in connecting the politics to people's day-to-day lives are often about just how we meet our basic human needs. And this is a map, it's a couple of years old now, I couldn't find one newer, of people's development, human development. It's an index created from a whole bunch of different other measures about people's lives that we can discuss, but it is a way for people to try to look at comparatively how developed certain parts of the world are. And so you see the dark green, like Australia, New Zealand, large parts of Europe, Canada, and the US, while you have other regional clusters of moderate development in yellow or low development in red, that you see a dramatic inequality between different regions. And we're going to be talking about in the class, like next week, looking at environmental economic factors connected to the environment and people's security. But this is another way of drawing that mental map to try to make that water visible, showing the dramatic inequalities between different countries. I mean, just look at the difference between Brunei and the Malaysian part of the island of Borneo. Just dramatic contrast between Israel and Egypt or Jordan, right? There's the political history, legacies that previous generations have left us, that people have had to take turns as leaders and as citizens deciding what they want, what they're willing to put up with, and what they're going to fight for. Another kind of way of looking at it is through the conflict lens, right? This is my focus, and we're going to be talking a lot about it. That you see in this map as well. Hopefully, you see similarities between the level of fragility in the African region, as well as the correlation between state fragility and levels of human development, as well as you see similarities in North America and in Europe and in Australia as well. That fragility is another index. It used to be the state failure index, and then they changed it to fragility to try to deal with the challenge of what do you call a state after it's failed. If you have a failed state index and countries fail, like Somalia or Yemen, there's still people living there. There's still governments or organizations that are tasked with trying to take care of the citizens to the extent that they can within their borders. And so they've had this state fragility index as another way of trying to show the regional inequalities that states have, and also show relative change as well. So this is a map from the 2019 index. I couldn't find one for the latest year's index, but you do see certain countries change for the worse, right? Libya, Yemen, Syria, of course. Venezuela is going to be a case we're going to be talking about later in the term. But then also countries are getting better. I think in this class, as well as others, it can be tempting to have that water of a lack of appreciation for how much better people's human security has come over the last couple of centuries, that there has been cost to that, but then there has also been improvements as well. So I think that's something that we also wanted to make explicit and discuss over the course of the term. And I think just in taking a step back, I'm not as good as drawing one of those world maps, so I didn't try. My dad was a cartographer for a bit to pay the bills when I was little, and I've always been fascinated with maps, but I'm not able to really draw them that well. So I drew this as a way to kind of show the interrelationship between the issues we're going to be touching on in this class: the physical environment, the human environment, and violent conflict. Violent conflict occurs, of course, in the human political environment, but it also has a real cost on the physical environment, tying back to the environmental destruction in the waning days of the Iraq War in 1991, to the huge environmental costs of, as well as cultural costs in a number of different conflicts around the world. Blowing up the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan, the Taliban was an example of trying to eradicate that kind of cultural history. Or blowing up infrastructure during a conflict could be a way to try to destroy the human environment that can make it costly to rebuild. Actually, I did create this map. I've been using GIS for some of my research, and I drew this map that had the countries without the names, but it's a way, I don't know, there's got to be a better way to combine a map that captures both the physical and the political world, but it ties into the difficulty in trying to represent a number of different factors that relate to each other, but that are often distinct or working at different levels. And so let's see, where are we? We are right there. And we get a lot of students taking this class or have watched the videos from a whole bunch of different parts of the world. I should create this map and fill in the number of people from the number of different countries that watched the last version of this class. So if you're not in the class in Australia, and I know some of the students in my class are actually stuck abroad, welcome. You can draw your mental map, and we want to encourage you in helping to draw this this class's map over the course of the term. So I think with that, I will talk about, let's see. Yes, I wanted to talk about the class's main questions that we're going to be focusing on. How does environmental factors shape human security, and what are the direct and indirect means by which environmental phenomena affect violent political conflicts? So it's kind of a multi-step kind of question. How does environmental factors shape human security, and more indirectly, but also sometimes directly, do environmental phenomena affect violent political conflict? Again, taxing my skills at trying to make path diagrams, but I think this is a way to try to show those direct and indirect means that are going to be at the heart of this class. So it went right to that. So let's see, let's get rid of that. So in this class, students will have a bunch of different interests. And so you might be only really focused on environmental factors and how they kind of connect to human security. Or if you come from an IR or traditional security conflict, maybe your focus is just on conflict and you want to choose something random from human security or environment and see if there's a direct or indirect effect. But then also it could be that you shouldn't feel obligated in this class or in any class really to try to cover everything at once, right? The world is enormously complex. It's impossible to give everything its due attention. What we're doing in this class is we're narrowing down specific questions, specific elements, specific representations of in the environment of human security and conflict, and then try to draw our mental map to connect these different factors over the course of 12 weeks. But for your own research, because this class is, of course, driven by my interest to try to help you become more than just a consumer of political research, but also a producer. And so if your focus is just on environmental factors, or if your focus is on how conflict has an environmental effect, I know some students in previous iterations of this class have done that, or if you just want to focus on how human security affects conflict, there's no need to cover everything. We in the class are going to cover a lot of different topics, but the research project and the literature review is your opportunity to really just focus on one particular part that means something to you. So yeah, let's start by briefly defining our terms in each one of those boxes. The environment is geography, geographical features, what you can extract and find useful from the natural environment. Climate events, right? There's a difference between climate and weather. Weather is short term, and climate is more longer term environmental events, and changes in geography, resources, and climate. Human security is, from the readings for today, the condition in which people and communities have the capacity to manage stresses to their needs, rights, and values. I know some students come from across campus and might have a different conceptualization of security, a hard definition of national security, often focused on contemporary security events. But I think in this class, I want to define security more broadly. I think the conflict side will cover some of the hard elements of security, but human security. How do all of us as humans manage the stress to needs, rights, and values? And I think the international system has faced some huge challenges, and people's ability to manage those stresses has been laid bare. The inequalities and the differences between people like me who can work from home and to be able to manage that stress of a global pandemic, while other people in other industries and other jobs or in other countries don't have the same kind of ways of managing those stresses. So that's human security. We're going to be talking about that in a couple of weeks. And then conflict. And I think this is where I really get into my focus on outcomes that have defined my research. And I think there's a couple of main elements I want to touch on here. We're going to be talking about this in more detail for the first part of the class. We must define war in terms of violence. Not only is war impossible without violence, except of course in the metaphysical sense, but we consider the taking of human life the primary and dominant characteristic of war. This is by one of the earlier and influential quantitative international conflict databases that were developed by Small and Singer. So there has to be violence of a physical sense and a threshold of battle-related fatalities of troops in combat. We're going to be talking about the costs and benefits of different thresholds there. And then the status of war participants. International conflict is related to participants. Both sides are states. Civil conflict, intrastate conflict is related to the government fighting a non-state participant actor, group actor. And then you have one-sided violence in which you have a non-state actor targeting violence against citizens. There's a lot of different types of conflict that you can focus on and that we will focus on in this class. But those are a couple of simple definitions of our terms, but I think it's in the beginning, given the complexity and the generality of the topics that we're covering, there's decisions in deciding what we include and what we don't in our discussions, which I look forward to talking more about in the workshop. But let's take a little bit of a break, and then we'll turn to how political scientists draw our own mental maps and how we're going to be engaging with the cutting edge literature over the course of the next 12 weeks, and how I can try to help you understand how much we do know and how much we still don't know. So let's move on to that now.